Coming up on this edition of the Penn State Blitz, Penn State's got a road trip to Iowa. Biggest test of the season by far. We got to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the way that the Hawkeyes match up maybe perfectly with the Nittany Lions. KJ Hamler went off against Purdue again, another big game for the speedy wideout. We're going to talk about how defenses are playing him and how Penn State can maybe take advantage of all the attention he's receiving. And then we're going to finish with, as always, the Penn State Mailbag. Okay, Greg Pickle, another round of the Penn State Blitz podcast. A huge success. People are raving about your handicapping tips. Good and bad, mostly bad, but that can be a good thing if you're smart. I think if you're a smart handicapper, there's some information that we can use.
Got to know when to fade and when to follow.
I know you love the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. God bless you. Hopefully you'll have some other interesting picks for us. But let's talk. Let's talk about Penn State, unbeaten Penn State, a road trip to Kinnick Stadium. We're going to talk about that, how big of a test it is. We're going to talk about maybe how Iowa matches up maybe perfectly with this Penn State team. It's not easy to do. Also, we're going to talk about KJ Hamler, the dynamic Penn State wideout return man, another big game against Purdue. We're going to talk about how teams are playing him and whether maybe Penn State can take advantage of that. We're going to get into a little Penn State mailbag, and I know at some point we're going to be talking about some picks and predictions. We'll see. It's early. It's early in the podcast. So let's talk. It's the Hawkeyes. They took one on the chin at Ann Arbor last week, only scored 3 points.
But the teaser, the under, and the Hawkeyes up to 10. It was not easy, but it got there.
You might as well brag now because I think there were some picks that maybe didn't work out for
Rutgers is on the no longer touch list now. It took 2 weeks, but they're there.
Okay. But Iowa is kind of a different team at home. Penn State's a slight favorite, like about a field goal.
It's up to 4 now.
3.5.
Yeah.
It's still a slight favorite, Greg. Come on. You're interrupting my flow. Anyway, so the Hawkeyes have a history of surprising pretty good teams at home. You know exactly what you're going to get from Iowa, but sometimes they always find a way to knock teams off. You remember 2 years ago, Penn State lost a tough one to Ohio State at the Horseshoe, and Ohio State was feeling pretty good about itself. They went to Iowa City the next week, and they just got trampled. I think it was 55-24. You just got to be careful with this Iowa team. They have some very good players. Mm-hmm. Still not sure about their quarterback, but when you look at this test,
one way to put it.
When you look at this test, obviously they've already won impressively on the road, 59-0 against Maryland, but this is kind of a different animal.
It certainly is. I think I'm viewing this game differently though, because the last time Penn State went to Kinnick, it didn't have a win like that on its resume already. Mm-hmm. And as we're talking about the blowout down at Maryland, so it's Penn State. It's a weird vibe this week to me because I feel like a lot of fans are overlooking this trip because of what Iowa did at Michigan and what Penn State's done the first 5 weeks that they've played out of 6 in the college football season. So I don't know if this Iowa team, though, is as good as some of the ones we've seen Penn State go out there and face. I think the game plan that Penn State rolled out against Pittsburgh and Kenny Pickett can work again this weekend. Mm-hmm. I don't remember back in 2017 when that trip, was going on. I don't know if you felt good enough about Penn State being able to do what it can do to this Iowa offense, and that's just make Nate Stanley, who I know is one of your favorite Big Ten quarterbacks.
Yes,
he's
in my top 14.
Yeah, and he might not even make that. We'll have to wait and see. But you have to make him throw. Yeah. Michigan just showed how to do it. The only difference is Penn State knows how to put points on the board. Michigan did not. Are we overvaluing Penn State's start and undervaluing what Iowa is based off of recency bias, the game against Michigan? Yeah. Probably. But it's a tough test out there, no doubt. They'll be sold out. It'll be loud. It'll be noisy. They're going to have to start fast like they did at Maryland.
To your point, this is a Penn State team that's already won on the road. I would just say, and this is not being devil's advocate, it took a magnificent effort from Saquon Barkley in that game in 2017. I don't know if you remember, like all the stuff he did at Penn State, the run in the Rose Bowl against USC. That game, he sent the Penn State single game total yardage mark. I think he ran for over 200 yards, caught 12 passes for like 90 yards, jumped over a guy. I mean, if he doesn't do any of that, If he misses out on one of those plays, they probably lose that game, and they still needed the last play of the game and a very unlikely drive to do it. So I just think that Iowa is going to be tough, and I know that this team might be a little bit more balanced than maybe that 2017 team. That team had some great individual players, and it was a very good team. This is a younger team, though, that's deeper. I think they're definitely deeper. It's going to be real interesting to see if how Penn State can start. We could talk about that a little later, Greg. But before we move on, I thought maybe we should just touch upon, we were in State College on Tuesday.
Yep.
Penn State's got a really talented young safety named Jonathan Sutherland, redshirt sophomore, doesn't always start, plays a lot, great on special teams, a very popular player on the Lions team, well thought of in every circle. He got some pretty aggressive mail from a Penn State grad and a Penn State fan.
Yep.
Critical of his appearance. It made the rounds on social media. James Franklin, very emotional in the statement he gave, kind of just defending Sutherland and talking about what his program's all about. My question just is, do you sense any kind of impact at all on the Penn State team early in the week with the Iowa game approaching?
I would say if there is any, it's only positive at this point. I think it brings them together. I think there's a little bit more close. And this is a pretty tight-knit group to begin with, so I'm not really sure how much tighter the ball could be wound, if that makes sense. But I thought it was a defining moment for the Franklin era. I really did. I mean, that was about as strong of a statement as I think we've heard him deliver on any topic.
Right.
Obviously, former players, current players, others came out in defense of Jonathan Sutherland, and with good reason. I mean, it goes back to the elementary thought: if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it at all. And further than that, there's no real good reason to tweet at players, to tweet at coaches, to send letters to them, to send emails to them. If you have something nice to say, go ahead. But I just, the whole thing was regrettable, I think is the word to use. But in terms of, it's one word to use anyway, but in terms of moving forward, I just don't see this being a distraction for this team. If we know anything about James Franklin, it's want to know, Iowa. That has helped him get through a lot of on-field issues, off-field distractions, whatever you want to call it. So I don't see it being a problem heading into Iowa City.
I agree with you for sure, and I do think I thought the players they made available, Will Fries and Micah Parsons, were asked about it. I thought the way that they handled it and addressed it, and it looks like this is something they're going to move forward off of this. I think they handled it very well.
Yep.
A lot of young players on that team. I was impressed all the way around the way that the Penn State program has kind of handled business the last 24 to 36 hours. Let's talk about a couple of days from now as we talk about the Iowa game. You mentioned up to 4, opened at 3. When I look at this Iowa team, and I know that they did not play well against Michigan. The 10-3 loss, the 8 sacks. They just didn't get anything done on offense. As the Big Ten season has unfolded, I think it's pretty clear that as well as Penn State started, everyone's chasing Ohio State. That win at Nebraska a couple weeks ago was about as impressive of a win as you can see in that environment.
Yep.
And then they came back the next week, slow start against Michigan State, but they still put them away, and that's a pretty good defense. I think they're clearly who everyone's gunning for.
Yeah, they're the class of the Big Ten.
But when I look at what Penn State's facing with Iowa, I'm just wondering if, sometimes the game comes down to key matchups. And I'm just wondering what happens in this game if what Penn State does really well so far this year, when I'm talking about rushing the passer and obviously scoring points on offense, what happens if Iowa can take a lot of that away because of the matchups? Penn State's 2 defensive ends have been terrific early in the season, Shaka, Toney, and Yetur, Gross-Matos. Iowa has a couple of NFL caliber tackles on the right and left side. Tristan Wirfs on the right side. Alaric Jackson is on the left side. He made his first appearance against Michigan after hurting his knee in the opener. He didn't look like it was quite 100%, and that's not a great place to kind of come off an injury, and he took his lumps. But those 2 matchups, I think, in the game, if Iowa and that crowd can kind of get the better of that matchup, it could really be a problem for Penn State.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think if Ricky Ronnie was ever going to break out the quick passing game, we've seen them throw some screens at teams the last 2 weeks. We've seen them try to get KJ Hamler involved more over the middle, Jahan Dotson as well.
Right.
If there's a week to do it and try and neutralize that defensive line, it's this week, because Epenesa's a problem.
Yeah, AJ Epinesa, right.
The guys you just mentioned are problems. I mean, James Franklin mentioned Geno Stone, the safety,
Yep.
the defensive back who's very good. But I don't think Iowa necessarily scares you over the middle. I mean, it's an Iowa team. They have
Right.
good, solid linebackers, but I don't think any of them scare you like some guys have there in the past. So, to me, I think if you flip the matchup on its head a little bit and you try and get the quick passing game going to neutralize them, and then we saw that you can pressure this Iowa team, but to me it comes down to the run defense has bottled up Anthony McFarland and some other good rushers. I know Buffalo got the better of them for 3 quarters, but to me, if you can stop the run, it makes Nate Stanley throw. He threw 3 interceptions against Michigan. Michigan didn't turn those into game-deciding scoring drives. Penn State can. I think that is maybe the biggest key of all is that, once you make Stanley throw, from there, you got to make those turnovers hurt because they're going to come.
Yeah.
They're going to come at some point.
If ever there was a time for Penn State to take advantage of its 260-pound tight ends and put them both on the field, almost flanking the tackles at times when they want to do some things or help on those ends, if they felt like they needed help. I'm talking the other way. I'm talking about Rasheed Walker going against Epineza, and the other end, his name escapes me, but Penn State James Franklin praised him. You put those 2 tight ends maybe by them as well, and kind of maybe chip on them or help. I think that is a recipe, I think, for success for Penn State. Would help them run the ball, but they could also use those guys as targets in the passing game. Nick Bowers is really coming on the last couple of games.
Yeah, where Pat Freiermuth has been almost nowhere to be found, which is not something I would have predicted coming into this season.
But he did get a touchdown last week, and I think as the Big Ten season unfolds, I think he's going to become more of a weapon. But I do think that their tight ends they're built like offensive tackles, so I do think if early in the game Epinesa is getting loose, I think that's one way to kind of slow him down. But it's going to be I think it's really going to be a game at scrimmage where Penn State's either going to have to hold its own or get the better of these guys because it is a tough environment. The noise is going to be a factor, and I just think that the Iowa team you saw at Michigan, I don't think you're going to quite see that Iowa team at home. They are challenged to score points, but it's one of those pace games. If they can keep the game in the low 20s, much like they did 2 years ago, it's going to go down to the wire.
Yeah, no question. And, we'll get into this in a second, but I think KJ Hamler can obviously play a big role in this game too, and what Penn State does to get him in the space. Before we get to that, if you're listening to the podcast, the Penn Live Penn State Blitz podcast, like, subscribe, rate, leave us feedback, kill my picks, tell us how much you won fading them. That's fine. You can do that on Apple, Google, Stitcher, wherever you get your audio. If you're listening to the Penn State Blitz video, don't forget to subscribe. youtube.com/allpennstate. I got it this week, Bob.
That was pretty close to perfect. That was your best one to date. And we're not even halfway through this season, so don't peak too early.
Right.
You talked about KJ Hamler. James Franklin was asked about him. He's such a dynamic player. I think with Rondale Moore of Purdue not playing right now, he's about as dangerous a player, I think, as there is on the offensive side of the ball in the Big Ten. He had a huge night against Maryland a couple of weeks ago. I think he caught the first touchdown pass of the game against Purdue.
Yep.
They tweaked their coverages a little bit, and James kind of acknowledged, look, they're gonna double him in obvious situations. It might not be apparent pre-snap, but they're gonna have 2 guys traveling with KJ, and he basically said it's up to us to take advantage of when they commit the extra defender to him in the passing game. How do we take advantage of open spaces somewhere else?
Well, the Maryland game is a perfect example of one way you do that with him, and that's send him across the middle. James Franklin, one of the interesting things he said this week was that they're seeing teams not double team him at scrimmage like they would a gunner on a punt, but they're doing it with levels. So how do you avoid that? You never let him get to the second level, and you send him across the middle. If he beats his guy at the line of scrimmage, which he's going to do more often than not on those routes, if he gets off his guy and gets open over the middle, and then he just runs. And it worked to perfection against Maryland. So more of that would be good. I think beyond that, Bob, it's a chance to get the running backs involved in the passing game, especially if, like what you said, if you're keeping your tight ends in, you can't have 2 tight ends in and your running back chipping because you are not presenting numbers that work in your favor against any defense, let alone one that can make plays like Iowa's clearly can. So to me, I think it's a chance to get not only the running backs more involved in the passing game, which we've seen a little bit of, maybe not a ton, but it's a chance to do that. And I think it's also obviously an opportunity for Jahan Dotson and some of these other guys to get some run. We don't know if Justin Shorter will play. That's one thing we'll have to watch for this week after the targeting deal at Maryland forced him to miss Purdue. They could certainly use him back, but I just think that, even a guy like Dan Chisetta, if they're going to bracket on the other side of the field, send him long. Maybe you get a pass interference like the Purdue game, maybe not. But, it is a situation where I think we've talked about it before, that they have not been great at times about when teams take their weakness away, exploiting the other team's weaknesses that come about it.
Yeah, and James talked earlier in the year about in-game adjustments and them not coming fast enough on the Penn State side. They said he has to get better at it. I do think a 2 tight end set is probably something you will see more of than you're used to if you're a Penn State fan. And I just want to be fair to the Penn State offensive line. I mentioned Rasheed Walker and Will Fries. They played well.
Yeah.
They played very well, especially the last 2 weeks. But the challenge that they're facing on the road with the noise, Epinesa is viewed almost as a better prospect, I think, at this point than Yetur Gross-Matos. That is a tough ask of a redshirt freshman left tackle. He'll be making his 6th start just to handle him one-on-one. It just, no one really can, so he's going to need some help at some point. But he still has played well, and I think Fries has played well too. But they're going to be tested, and there are going to be times where Penn State, in obvious, I think, passing situations, they're going to have to give them a little help because they can wreck the game on one play, or they can turn momentum in one play. And on the road, that's a big deal. You do not want to get this crowd. They're going to be pretty juiced up to begin with. You don't want to get them, stomping their feet.
Is it mailbag time?
It finally is mailbag time. I can't wait. I know you have some good questions for me.
Yeah,
do you have any strong comments for me or anything? Is this going to be all questions?
I think it'll just be questions, but we'll see. There might be a statement or two. Let's start with true or false. This kind of plays off of what you were just talking about. But true or false, this is the first game this year where Penn State's 4- and 5-star recruiting edge that's been developed over teams like Iowa over the last 2, 3, 4 recruiting cycles. It has to show itself. You talk about Rasheed Walker, former 4-star. Look around the Big Ten, look around the country. There's former 4- and 5-star offensive linemen making big impacts like Rasheed Walker has so far this year. They also have some other very talented guys, 5-star Justin Shorter, a bunch of 4- and 5-stars in the backfield. To me, Bob, it's true that this game is one where if you're going to win it on the road, you need your roster talent advantage, which Penn State clearly has, to shine through. Where do you stand on that, true or false?
I love how you asked me the true and false question,
and
you
essentially
answered it. But that's okay. That's okay. Your knowledge is impressive. I agree. It's a true. I think that Penn State is the more talented team. I'm positive that they're the deeper team, but that has to show itself on the road because, people have their opinions on what home field means. I think it depends on where the game is. I think at Beaver Stadium, most games, I think that is worth 10 points to Penn State. I really do. And I think when Iowa's at home, I think it's at least a touchdown advantage for Iowa. I really think that's the gap that's the gap you're trying to close, and that's the gap that you have to deal with. I agree with you on the recruiting. I would say though that there are a few teams in the country better at developing 2- and 3-stars into 4-star kids. I don't even think AJ Epinesa was a big time recruit. I could be wrong about that. I don't remember him at the time he was brought to Iowa. But they're very good at developing players, and they got a lot of players in the NFL. They got a Pennsylvania kid out of Pennsylvania, Geno Stone, who had the pick 6 last year against Trace. And James mentioned it's tough to see kids in Pennsylvania do well for other teams in the Big Ten, but every once in a while they slip through the cracks. He's another developmental kid. I think from Newcastle.
That's right.
PA, Newcastle High School. But I would say true. It's a lean towards true.
Okay. Put yourself in James Franklin's shoes for a second. You send your captains out for the coin toss, you win the toss. Do you want to put your offense on the field and try and quiet that crowd down immediately, or do you want to put your defense out there, let Jordan Stout kick it through the end zone, presumably, and then let your defense set the tone for how the night's going to go?
Assuming there's no wind, and
it's supposed to be very windy.
You talked about the fact it might be windy.
Yes.
If there's no wind, I'm taking. I'm gonna defer, and I'm gonna put my defense out on the field. If there's a lot of wind, I might choose to be on the right side of that wind and try and start fast against the Iowa Hawkeyes. Your weather report to me tells me there's going to be wind. I want the wind to start the game.
Yeah, there you go. It's going to be gusty, supposedly, in Iowa City, a little bit chilly, so we'll have to wait and see.
It could be gusty Friday in Iowa City, too. We get out there pretty early, and I heard a couple of your buddies are coming out. It might be getting a little gusty around happy hour on Friday in Iowa City. That's my early weather report.
Okay, there you have it. So if you're listening to the Penn State video blitz, we're moving on to our second video. It's picks and predictions on youtube.com/allpennstate. If you're listening on the podcast, we'll be back to pick the game right after this break.